Her phone buzzed in his hand. Ethan glanced at the screen, sweat still on his brow from the job site. A message lit up, sharp and cold. "I think maybe we need to break up." His coworker beside him expected the usual. Panic, anger, maybe even begging. But Ethan only smirked faintly, typed back 2 words and hit send. "I agree. Welcome to Amelia's stories. Stay with me because these stories of love, trust, and betrayal are drawn from real life, carrying lessons that hit deep." If you're new here, don't forget to share, like, and drop your city in the comments. Ethan Miller, 28, had always been the kind of man people respected. Steady hands, loyal heart. A hard-working electrician who believed in keeping promises. Beside him for 4 years was Lena Carter, 26, a nurse with charm and ambition, always chasing something more. To friends, they were a perfect couple, the kind people pointed to with admiration. But Ethan had begun to notice things. The late nights, the vague answers, the way Lena's eyes wandered instead of locking with his. He ignored the whispers, convinced himself that loyalty meant patience, that trust meant silence. So when her message came, it didn't crush him. It confirmed what he had already sensed in his gut. Something had been slipping away for months. What Lena didn't know was that Ethan wasn't the kind of man to chase after what didn't want to stay. And this was only the beginning. Ethan sat on his couch one evening, staring at the half-empty dinner plate Lena had left behind. She had called saying she'd be late again. Another double shift, another vague explanation. At first he believed her. She was a nurse after all. Long hours came with the job. But something about the way she said it, quick, clipped, like she didn't want him to ask more, made his stomach twist. The changes weren't loud, but they were steady. She used to curl up beside him after work, telling him about every patient, every detail of her day. Now she brushed him off with tired smiles and short answers. Their intimacy, once easy and warm, had grown distant. Even when she kissed him goodnight, it felt more like habit than love. His friends noticed before he admitted it to himself. One night at the bar, his buddy Mark leaned over and said quietly, "Man, she doesn't look at you the same anymore." Ethan laughed it off, pretending not to care, but the words cut deeper than he let on. Still, Ethan told himself loyalty meant patience, that sometimes love had dry seasons and it was his job to stand steady. He chose trust over confrontation, swallowing the unease building inside him. But late at night, lying awake beside an empty space in bed, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through his fingers. The cracks in their relationship weren't small anymore. They were spreading and he could feel it. Ethan was up on a ladder, rewiring lights in a half-finished house when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a routine message, but the words froze him in place. "I think maybe we need to break up." No explanation, no call, just a flat sentence that cut like glass. His coworker, Tyler, glanced over. "Man, that's rough. You okay?" He expected Ethan to curse, to throw the phone, maybe even rush off the job. But Ethan just stared at the screen for a moment, lips pressed tight, then gave the faintest smile. Without hesitation he typed back, "I agree." Tyler blinked. "That's it? Just like that?" Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket and climbed down the ladder. "Yeah. Just like that." The silence that followed was almost heavier than the message itself. Lena didn't text back, didn't call, didn't even send a half-hearted excuse. The quiet was her answer, and in a way, it was louder than any words. Most men might have begged, demanded to know why, tried to hold on to what was slipping away. But Ethan wasn't most men. His calm wasn't weakness, it was a choice. He knew in his gut this wasn't sudden. Breakups like that never are. There was a reason behind her cold words, and Ethan wasn't about to let it stay hidden. He didn't plan to move on just yet. He planned to dig. To find the truth buried beneath her silence. Ethan's instincts wouldn't let him rest. After the breakup text, he started paying closer attention. Where Lena went, who she spent time with, what she posted, even the small slips in conversations when mutual friends mentioned her. It didn't take long before patterns began to surface. One name kept coming up, Ryan Keller. 30 years old, successful, well-dressed, and the owner of a growing contracting company. Ethan remembered him clearly. He had hired Lena's younger brother just a few months ago. At the time it had seemed harmless. Now it all fit together. Through quiet digging, asking the right questions, driving past places Lena claimed she was working late, the truth hit him like a punch. Lena and Ryan weren't new. They had been seeing each other for months, long before her text ended things. The betrayal wasn't just recent. It had been woven into the last part of their relationship, staining every smile and kiss with lies. Ethan sat alone in his truck, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. Humiliation burned in his chest, but deeper than that was the raw sting of rage. He had given Lena loyalty, trust, patience, and she had traded it for someone flashier, richer, someone she thought was a step up. That night, staring at the dark road ahead, Ethan whispered to himself, "If she wanted to trade up, I'll make sure she pays for it." It wasn't a threat shouted in anger. It was a vow carved in stone. Ethan didn't storm to Lena's door or fire off angry messages. Instead, he kept his voice steady whenever she reached out for small matters. Dropping off a box of her things, exchanging the last few belongings. He was polite, almost indifferent, which only fed her belief that she had won. To her, it must have looked like he was quietly licking his wounds while she moved on with someone better. But Ethan's silence wasn't weakness, it was cover. While Lena was busy flaunting her new life, he was busy working in the shadows. He started learning everything he could about Ryan Keller. Contractors talk and Ethan listened. Rumors about shady bookkeeping, corner cutting on job sites, and questionable permits began to form a picture of a man whose wealth stood on shaky ground. At the same time, he thought about Lena's habits. He knew she had used his name as a reference for her new apartment lease. He knew her weak spots, her dependence on others to cover when she overextended, her tendency to leave loose ends behind. Patience became Ethan's greatest weapon. He didn't need to rush. Every day he acted calm was another day they believed he was harmless. He let Lena believe she had upgraded, and he let Ryan believe his secrets were safe. Behind the quiet exterior, Ethan was sharpening the edges of a plan. Not with shouting, not with fists, but with precision. His revenge wouldn't just sting. It would dismantle them piece by piece. Ethan's research paid off. The more he looked into Ryan's business, the dirtier it appeared. He found unpaid permits, jobs signed off without inspection, and subcontractors who whispered about missing payments. To anyone else it was gossip, but Ethan collected details carefully, piece by piece, until he had enough to see the bigger picture. Ryan's company was a house of cards waiting to collapse. At the same time, Ethan remembered something Lena probably thought nothing of. When she applied for her new apartment, she had still listed him as her rental reference. It was a small thing, but it gave Ethan quiet power. All it would take was one honest conversation with the landlord, and her carefully built post-breakup stability could come crashing down. Ethan never let on. When Lena texted occasionally, short, casual check-ins as if to prove she was still on good terms, he replied kindly. He asked about work, wished her well, even cracked a joke or two. To her, it must have looked like he had accepted everything, like he had found peace. But beneath the calm surface, Ethan was aligning the pieces. On one side, a contractor with shady practices. On the other, a woman still unknowingly leaning on him for credibility. He didn't need to strike yet. He only needed to be patient, letting both of them relax, letting them think they had outgrown him. This was the quiet before the storm, the moment when everything looked calmest, right before it broke apart. Ethan chose his moment with care. Early one morning, he drafted an anonymous letter and sent it straight to the city inspector's office. He didn't embellish, didn't lie. He simply laid out the evidence he'd gathered about Ryan's cut corners and illegal bookkeeping. Within days, inspectors were swarming job sites, shutting down projects, and handing Ryan fines that would bleed his company dry. Word spread fast, and the image of the polished, successful contractor began to crumble in front of everyone. While Ryan scrambled, Ethan turned to Lena. When her new landlord called for a reference, Ethan answered calmly, his tone even. But this time he told the truth. He explained how Lena had left unpaid bills, walked away from responsibilities, and left him to cover what she abandoned. It wasn't anger, it was fact. And facts were enough to sink her chances. Days later, Lena's application was rejected, her dream of a fresh apartment slipping away. What made Ethan's revenge cut deeper was how silent it was. He didn't argue with Lena. He didn't confront Ryan. He never raised his voice or let his bitterness show. On the surface, he remained the same quiet, steady man. But beneath that stillness, he was dismantling their lives piece by piece. Ryan lost contracts and credibility. Lena lost her security and stability. And Ethan, without ever lifting more than his words and patience, had struck a blow that neither of them ever saw coming. Until it was too late. The pressure came fast and heavy. Ryan's business, once a picture of success, started unraveling with every fine and cancelled contract. He grew restless, snapping at everyone around him. At home, the tension spilled over. He turned on Lena, accusing her of being a distraction, of pulling his focus away when he needed it most. Lena, already shaken by her failed lease application, fired back. She blamed Ryan for destroying the stability she thought she was gaining by leaving Ethan. What was supposed to be her better life now looked like a crumbling mess. Their arguments grew louder, sharper. Neighbors could hear the shouting through the walls. Bills piled up. Ryan tried cutting deals, but his reputation was already scarred. Lena, without a place of her own, started drifting between friends' couches, carrying her belongings in bags from one stop to another. What once felt like an upgrade now felt like punishment. Ethan never needed to see it directly. Word traveled through mutual friends, and every story painted the same picture. The shiny romance was overrun with bitterness and blame. Ryan was sinking in debt. Lena was unstable and restless, and together they were tearing each other apart. For Ethan, the satisfaction wasn't loud or vengeful. It was quiet, almost poetic. They had destroyed themselves under the very weight of their choices. The betrayal that once humiliated him was now collapsing from within, leaving nothing but wreckage in its place. It was months before Ethan saw Lena again. One evening, a knock echoed at his door. When he opened it, she was standing there, eyes red and swollen, her hair a tangled mess of exhaustion. She clutched her jacket tightly as if holding herself together. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking, "please, can we talk?" He didn't answer, just stepped aside slightly, letting her spill her words. She cried as she spoke about how things had fallen apart, about Ryan's downfall, about the emptiness that followed. Then her tone softened, reaching for what she thought might still be there. "You were always the one who cared for me," she said, her voice trembling. "You never gave up on us. Please, can we try again?" Ethan watched her carefully, his face unreadable. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Then, in a voice cold and steady, he said, "You were right that night when you said we needed to break up. I just didn't realize how right you were." Lena's expression shattered, hope draining into shock, then into quiet despair. Before she could say another word, Ethan stepped back and closed the door. For him, it wasn't about anger anymore. It was closure, brutal, final, and deserved. The chapter was closed, not with shouting or revenge in her face, but with the simple truth. She had chosen her path, and he had chosen to walk away forever. Ethan sat on his back porch one cool evening, a cold beer resting in his hand. The yard was quiet, the hum of crickets filling the space where old thoughts used to scream. For the first time in months, he felt no anger, no weight pressing down on his chest. It wasn't joy or celebration, it was peace. He thought back on everything that had happened. The lies, the betrayal, the months of doubt. At first it had felt like he'd lost everything. But slowly, piece by piece, he realized he hadn't lost it all. He had been freed. And by choosing patience instead of fury, silence instead of shouting, he had taken back control in a way that cut deeper than any argument ever could. There was no gloating. He didn't need to parade his victory. Watching the two of them unravel had been enough. His revenge hadn't been about noise. It had been about precision. Quiet, steady, thorough. He leaned back in his chair, took a sip, and allowed himself a faint smile. "She texted me to end things and I agreed," he murmured. What she never knew was that was the moment I started winning. Welcome back to Amelia's Stories. These true tales of love, betrayal, and hard lessons remind us that sometimes the quietest choices are the most powerful. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments.